Hi everyone, this is Miss Afric. We're going to continue talking about graphing sine and cosine, but we're going to talk about two new pieces to it, and that's the period change and the phase shift. Alright, once again, I already have some information written down, so to avoid the mistake of trying to multitask and still expect to understand what I'm talking about, let's go ahead and pause the video, jot this stuff down, and then we can pick up where we left off. Okay, so pause it. Alright, hopefully you did that. Let's start talking about some of this. So the last time we talked, we had just learned how to graph with amplitude and with a vertical shift up or down, in other words, the midline. Now we're going to add two new pieces. Alright, we have the period change and the phase shift. Now with the period, in order to find it, we're going to do 2 pi, because that's the normal period, and divide it by our b value. Right there. And the period in general is just the horizontal distance from the start to the end of one cycle. So on the graph, it's just from start to end of one cycle. Alright, and from the period, we can get our interval, which is period divided by 4. The second new piece is our phase shift. The phase shift is this C value right here that I'm underlining weirdly. Alright, see the minus sign? That means we have to do the opposite. So keep that in mind. And that should make sense because it's inside, right? Remember last semester? Inside means you do the opposite. And our phase shift tells us that we're shifting our graph left and right, which ends up giving us a new starting x value. Do you know what the old starting x value was? We used to just start at x equals 0. And if there's no phase shift, we'll still start there. But when we do have a phase shift, we're going to have to shift that value left or right. Alright, let's start graphing some and see if we can make some sense of this. Alright, so number 1, I have y equals 3 times the sine of 1/2 x. So again, these two pieces we've done before, so I'm going to go through those a little quicker. And then the period, the interval, and we got to add on our phase shift. Alright, those are the new parts, so I'm going to spend more time on them. So the amplitude comes from this number right here, the absolute value of 3, which would just be 3. Alright, our vertical shift is the number that you're adding on the end, which in this case there's nothing there. So in other words, D is what we call it, equals 0. So my vertical shift, you could say 0. I'm going to actually change that to say there is no shift at all. Just to keep in mind that it is an actual shift. So there either is one or there isn't. Alright, now the new stuff. The period, remember the formula, period is equal to 2 pi divided by b, where this number right here, the one you're multiplying x by, that's b. Now I know it's a fraction, but don't worry, we can handle this. We're going to do 2 pi divided by 1/2. Oops. There we go. But since we don't like, or really we can't divide by a fraction, we're going to rewrite this as 2 pi times the reciprocal of this fraction. So 2 over 1. Alright, so then if I put 2 pi over 1 as well and multiply straight across, we would get 4 pi over 1, and 4 pi divided by 1 is just 4 pi. So there's the period. Alright, it's a little different than we've done, but don't worry, we'll still make it work. Alright, and then the interval comes straight from that. The interval is the period divided by 4. So if my period is 4 pi, I would take 4 pi and divide it by 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1. So it's just pi. Alright, last new piece is our phase shift. Phase shift is the number you're adding inside to x, and we call it the C value. Alright, I'm not adding anything inside to x. Alright, usually there needs to be some kind of parentheses, so that's a little hint if there's a phase shift or not. Here there doesn't seem to be one, so C is 0. So once again, I'm just going to say, nope, there is no phase shift. Alright, now we can start graphing. We're going to start with the same first steps over here as we did before. So if I have a vertical shift, I would shift and move my midline with it. Since I don't, I'm going to stick with my original midline at y equals 0. And my amplitude is how much to go up and down. So up 1, 2, 3. Positive 3 is my max. And down 1, 2, 3. Negative 3 is my min. Alright, what changes here a little bit is the x values. Because before it ended up being the same thing because I wasn't changing the period, but now I am. Now we do still want 2 periods, 2 full periods there, so we're going to do 2 times the period to figure out how far that is. 2 times 4 pi is 8 pi. So that means the last x value I'm going to label as 8 pi. Alright, and then remember, now we start cutting things in half, and that's how we get all of our smaller values. Alright, so 4 pi, half of 8 pi is 4 pi. These numbers are going to be nice because we don't have very many fractions involved. In the next problem, we're going to do some with fractions, so just be ready, okay? Halfway between 0, this is 0 right here, and 4 pi is 2 pi. And halfway between 0 and 2 pi is pi. Alright, halfway between 2 pi and 4 pi. If you weren't sure of that one, all we would do is add them up and cut it in half, so divide by 2. Alright, 6 pi divided by 2, that's 3 pi. So I would know that halfway is 3 pi. So if you're ever not sure of what halfway is, that's the math we do. Alright, halfway between 4 pi and 8 pi is 6 pi. Halfway here is 5 pi. And halfway here is 7 pi. So again, no fractions, makes it kind of nice, right? Now we just got to start graphing. Alright, remember you got to figure out where we're going to start, and that depends on whether it's sine or cosine, and whether it's a positive or a negative number in front of sine or cosine. So here it is a positive 3, and it's sine. So positive sine means I start in the middle and go up next. So remember what we said before. If there's no phase shift, I start at regular x equals 0. So start in the middle and go up to my maximum first. And then it's just kind of a pattern. Middle, max, middle, min. Middle, max, middle, min. Middle. Connect the dots as best as you can. And there's my graph. Alright, usually, again, the x values give us the most trouble, so just make sure if you need to do this math down here to help yourself figure out these numbers, do it. Alright, it's always better to be sure. Alright, let's try another one. Number 2, y equals the cosine of 3x minus 1. So again, we'll start with the 2 we know, amplitude and vertical shift. So my amplitude is the absolute value of this number in front, which is a 1. Absolute value of 1 is just 1. And my vertical shift, that's this number over here. A lot of people mix it up and think that that's your phase shift. Well, let's just look back at the top real quick. Your phase shift should always be in parentheses. That's your hint that it's a phase shift as opposed to a vertical shift. So just check that out and you'll know the difference. Alright, so in this case, that's my vertical shift. I know before we were saying negative 1. I'm going to actually write that as down 1. It means the same thing, but it reminds me that it's a shift. So I got to actually move something. Alright, now the new stuff. The period, remember again, 2 pi divided by b. So in this case, our b value is 3, so it's just 2 pi divided by 3. And that's as much as it simplifies. Then our interval is the period divided by 4. This one's going to get a little tricky. 2 pi divided by 3 divided by 4. That's kind of messy. So once again, instead of dividing, I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. Straight across is 2 pi divided by 12, which simplifies to pi over 6. So there is my interval. Alright, the last thing we need is our phase shift here. Phase shift. So let's write it in if it's not written in on yours either. So phase shift again is C. It's the number you're adding in those parentheses. I don't see a number like that, so that means my C is 0. So once again, I have no phase shift here. But don't worry, we'll try and do one with one so you can make sense of it. Alright, let's start graphing. So remember, vertical shift, that's like your midline. So since I'm actually shifting it, I'm going to draw a new one. So if I shift it down 1, that would be at negative 1. And I'm going to draw my new midline there. The midline's really important, so that's why we draw it. instead of just labeling it. Alright, then the amplitude tells me to go up 1 to 0, that's my max, and down 1 to -2, that's my min. So the y values are taken care of. Now let's do our x's. This one's going to get a little tricky because of the fractions, so just try and follow along, and if you have questions, make sure you write it down so you can ask in class. So once again, we're doing 2 periods, so that means I'm going to do 2 times my period, which is 2 pi over 3. So that would be 4 pi over 3. So I'm going to end at 4 pi over 3. Now I start cutting things in half. And again, since it's fractions, it's a little tricky. Let's do some of the work down here. Alright, I'm starting right here at the x value. Alright, x equals 0. So halfway between 0 and 4 pi over 3. To figure that out, we would add them and then divide by 2. But wait, once again I have this fraction and a fraction. Ugh, that's annoying. So instead of dividing by 2, we're actually going to take 0 plus 4 pi over 3 and then multiply it by a half. Cutting it in half, right? Same thing. So that's going to give me 4 pi over 3 times 1/2, which is 4 pi over 6, and that simplifies to 2 pi over 3. So my halfway point is 2 pi over 3. Alright, again, that's the work if you need help cutting things in half. I'm going to go ahead and do that part a little faster, but once again, if you have questions on it, make a note of it so you can ask your teacher to go through it slower with you in class, in case that's still a sticking point. Alright, halfway between 0 and 2 pi over 3 would be 1 pi over 3. And then this one's tricky too. Halfway, again, you can do that work, right? It ends up being, let's see, 0 plus pi over 3 times 1/2. So that's pi over 3 times 1/2, which is pi over 6. Okay, and then once again, we do still have to finish this off. We've got a few more cutting in halves to do. And again, do the work if you need to. Halfway between pi over 3 and 2 pi over 3, you would add them and cut it in half. Same thing here. 2 pi over 3 and 4 pi over 3, add them, which gives us 2 pi, and cut it in half. And then same thing over here. So we got 5 pi over 6, and then add them and cut them in half. That's 7 pi over 6. Alright, so now that I've got everything, I can start graphing. Remember, in order to graph it, we need to know if it's positive or negative, and sine or cosine. Well, this one looks like a positive cosine. Do you remember where positive cosines start? Hopefully you said at the max, because that's right. So my max here is 0, so at x equals 0, I'm starting at the y value 0. And then we follow our pattern. Max, down to the middle, down to the min. Up to the middle, up to the max. Middle, min, middle, max. And there is our beautiful graph. Alright, not too shabby, huh? Alright, let's try one more. Go ahead and scroll down for number 3. Alright, so once again, we're going to go through, do the ones we know. Amplitude here, it looks like we've just got a plain old 1. And our vertical shift, I don't see anything over here, so that means we have no vertical shift. Okay, the period, this one's a little tricky, but just remember the period is based on the number you're multiplying by x. In this case, that looks like a 1 to me. So 2 pi divided by 1 is just 2 pi, so this is one of our usual ones, kind of. And that makes our interval pi over 2. Now, the one thing here that's different is there is a phase shift. Okay, and remember that phase shift is the opposite. So it's a negative pi over 2 here. That would be a positive pi over 2. So that would be to the right pi over 2. Alright, what that means, just as a side note, that's where we're going to start. That's the x value we're going to start at. So when we label our x values, the very first one we're going to label is now going to be pi over 2. It's going to make things a little bit trickier. Alright, so we're going to finish this one in class. so we have time to go through it. If you have any questions, make sure you write them down. See ya!